This is a story I've titled Three Assassinations. It was a Friday morning in late November 1963. I was in my second period algebra class, and we heard the loudspeakers overhead crackling. It was the vice principal's voice. He said, "Students, teachers, we were expecting an announcement about the pep rally that afternoon or the activity bus for the game that night. Instead," he said, "we've just received word that President Kennedy has been shot. The president has been shot, and he is dead. All extracurricular activities are canceled for the weekend. School is dismissed. Please take your regular buses home." Well, I sat there on the bus on the way home, looking out the window, looking in my lap, wondering what I was supposed to think about all this. I mean, all around me, kids were crying volubly. And I thought, it's a terrible thing when a president gets assassinated, but, I didn't know him. This isn't going to affect me personally. These kids crying, it's like, I don't know, it's like they lost a family member, a close friend or something. And it seemed kind of phony to me, except that ninth graders, especially boys, don't cry in public. And it occurred to me then that I was surrounded by all these kids whose parents had quite probably voted for John Kennedy. My parents hated Kennedy. They voted for Nixon. I remember that 1960 presidential campaign. I was 10 years old. They took me with them, knocking on doors, passing out bumper stickers, planting yard signs. They stayed up making phone calls. They really wanted him to win. And that election was so close, they held out hope till the last votes were counted. But when all was said and done, it wasn't Richard Nixon. No, it was the rich kid from Harvard, the papist who talked funny, who went to the White House. Not their man. Now, like Richard Nixon, my mom and dad had grown up in humble circumstances. We were living in Orange County, California at the time, but they had grown up in Oklahoma during the Great Depression. In Oklahoma, where the Jim Crow laws were strictly observed and enforced. In Oklahoma, where this separate but equal approach to race relations had been going just fine, thank you. And then here comes this East Coast intellectual, this John Fitzgerald Kennedy, bringing federal government in to integrate Southern lunch counters, Southern schools, Southern institutions, where he had no business being. And I'm sitting there on the school bus on the way home, looking out the window, and I thought, well, he got himself assassinated. I guess that's a terrible thing. But it all washed over us really quickly because, Thanksgiving was the next week and then Christmas. And by the time New Year's had rolled in, we were all accustomed to the idea of President Lyndon Johnson. Now, my mom and dad hated Johnson too. He was just plowing right through Kennedy's initiatives for civil rights, for liberal laws that were just driving America into the ground. All you had to do is look around. We were having them once a week now. Demonstrations, protests, sit-ins. We didn't experience them personally because we lived in a good neighborhood and I went to a white school, but 6 o'clock news, there they were. And my mom and dad would look at each other and say, what do those people want? That Martin Luther King and those Black Power agitators, they're whipping everybody into a frenzy. If they would go back to where they belonged, those people would remember where they belonged, and America could be great again. Somebody needs to shut Martin Luther King up. And in April of 1968, somebody did shut him up. My next-door neighbor was beside herself. She came to make the big announcement to my mother. She said, "Isn't this just what I always said was going to happen? Haven't I been saying he's been asking for this for years?" Well, as far as I'm concerned, that man got no better than he deserved. My mother said, "Well, granted, he won't be making any more speeches, but you know, the real tragedy is that now the man is a martyr." My father said, "Pay attention, Megan. Pay attention. This is what happens. You stand up, you rock the boat, you challenge the status quo, you are making yourself a target. Hope you understand that." I didn't understand anything. At the time of King's murder, I was a sophomore in college, a very sheltered sophomore, living at home where all the answers had been determined long before I even came along. I was going to a school where there weren't any answers, just more questions. In my home, a disagreement meant somebody left the conversation angry. At school, we were encouraged to disagree. We were encouraged to debate, to argue, to consider things from different perspectives, to sometimes change our minds. I just wanted somebody to tell me what I needed to study to pass the test. I thought, all this controversy, it's confusing. It's not like I can even vote yet, so what difference does it make to me? It distracts me from finals, from papers. I'm not even going to think about it. And I didn't, till June, when Robert Kennedy was shot and killed. Now, I knew what my mom and dad thought about Robert Kennedy. Not much. To their way of thinking, he was just like his big brother John, only worse, even a more devoted ally, a more devoted proponent of civil rights and all these policies and all this legislation that was making America go to hell in a handbasket. And until that bullet got him, it looked like he was on his way to the White House too. I heard about it on the radio, driving to my sociology class. Robert Kennedy had just won the California Democratic presidential primary. And on his way out of the convention hall, he was shot and killed. The announcer said, "Today has been declared a national day of mourning. People who want to honor the life and work of Senator Kennedy are encouraged to drive with their headlamps on as a show of respect." Well, at that moment, I honestly didn't know what I thought of Robert Kennedy. But in that moment, I did know one thing. In that moment alone, in the car, with no one around me to give me cues, what I was supposed to think, how I was supposed to react, that was the moment I knew. It is obscene to think that somebody standing up and speaking their truth constitutes grounds for homicide. In that moment, I knew it doesn't matter if I totally embrace your message or entirely reject it. You speaking what's on your mind should not get you shot. I sat up a little straighter in my seat. My hand trembled a little bit as it left the steering wheel. It was the most timid, tiny political statement, but it was my first. And I remember it viscerally, what it felt like to reach for the knob of those headlamps, to pull it toward me, and to drive with my high beams on all day.